What's up, everybody? Today is Monday, August 11, 2025. It's Luther Wilson III here on another YouTube video. Appreciate you tuning in. For those that don't know, I'm a real estate pro here in the Kansas City market, working with investors, investing in real estate, placing capital, and so forth. On this channel, a lot of what I talk about relates to investing in real estate, capital, operations, and strategy, okay? And I want to dig a little bit deeper into the operations aspect of the business. You could refer back to some previous videos. Lately, I've been diving more into the capital aspect. I've gotten into strategy. Some of y'all know seller financing is a key thing or a specialty of ours here in the KC market. And I want to talk more about operations because I think that tends to get put off or neglected, and it doesn't get talked about as much amongst, my fellow real estate practitioners, investors, and so forth. So a big thing with operations, I think, is huge, okay, is the willingness, okay? Somebody's got to be willing to do it, all right? The capacity to do it, okay? Someone on the ground who knows what they're doing, right? And then expectations, all right? So expectations of how business goes or how real estate flows is huge, okay? So those three things have to match up. And I want to dive deeper into operations because over the years, I've seen a massive disconnect between the capital and the operations, okay? And I've seen a huge disconnect between the money and the expectations of those who are investing that money or placing that money, and then the actual reality of what it's like to purchase, acquire, fund, renovate, maintain, manage, and do all of the things required for a real estate investing business. So that's the key part that I want to focus in on, is the operations for a real estate investing business, whether you or someone you're helping, a customer or client, is looking to purchase, renovate, and resell, or if you are wanting to purchase, renovate, refinance, and keep, or just buy and hold somehow, all right? I'll save the sales for another day, but I want to talk about how things flow for a true real estate investing business, all right? And when I think of operations for a real estate investing firm, some people refer to it as systems and processes, which is huge. That's very important. But I like to think of it as movement and management. Okay, so I think of operations as what keeps the fire burning. Okay, and then the capital, I would say, is more like the fuel for the fire. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense. And then the strategy is maybe the wood or something else. I haven't come up with a good analogy for that yet. But movement and management, okay? When I think of movement, I think of communication, okay? Follow up, okay? And follow through, okay? And then when I think of management, I think of management of the property, whether that's, property management or you're managing a renovation project, okay? And I think of management of the business itself, okay? Because there's aspects of the business that don't get talked about or mentioned as much either. And I think of bookkeeping, okay, tax filings, and documentation, all right? Okay, so there's management of the properties, however that looks, management of the business, however that looks, and then management of the people who are involved in making that business run, whether you're an owner or if you're hiring out for certain aspects of the management, okay? So this is huge, and I want to dig deeper into this so that people understand the reality of it, maybe for some of y'all, you'll be a little bit scared so that you won't necessarily try to take it on yourself, and you can seek out professionals like myself or someone in your market, because there's a lot that goes into it. And I've seen time and time again, a lot of investors, a lot of past customers and clients that I've had when I was doing third-party property management. I was helping a lot of out-of-state investors, and they got in somehow, okay? And as a former property manager, I usually was able to help them, and this is how I was able to grow my business and gain experience. Unfortunately for them, maybe fortunately for me, maybe fortunately for them, after they got involved with me, we were able to sort things out, but they got in somehow, right? However they got in, and then they made it through part of the process. And then, of course, the disconnect happened with the operations. Someone fumbled the bag along the way, and then the investor might have been disgruntled with a contractor that got hired and fired or walked off the job, or the investor who's 500 miles away or 1,000 miles away from the property in another state or perhaps in another country was upset with a property manager. And again, part of it is up to, part of it is expectations. So that's another thing that I hope this video does, is illuminates things so that perhaps those with capital and those operators and those folks who maybe aren't as experienced can adjust their expectations a little bit. Because if we go in with certain expectations, then we're setting ourselves up for doom, all right? So two big things that I think of, right? If we go in expecting to stay on budget for a renovation project, we might be setting ourselves up for disappointment, okay? That's a huge thing that I've seen, I don't know how many times, right? The other big thing, a disconnect when it comes to expectations, is property management, okay? So if we're expecting a third-party property manager, right, who has no vested interest, no ownership in the property, who's halfway across the country, right, or perhaps in another country, if we expect this third-party property manager to be on site and to be on task with whether they're managing a dozen or a few dozen doors, or they're managing 100 or a few hundred doors, for us to expect them to do right by us or that property it might be a little far-fetched. Okay, not in all cases, but let's refer to the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. And in fact, it's beyond 80-20. It's more like 90-10, and in a lot of cases, 5%, 95%. So you gotta, on your first go round, you may not catch or connect with somebody who's in that top 20 or top 5%, okay? You may have to go through a couple deals or go through a couple property managers or go through a few contractors before you land on maybe a good service provider, a good broker. And then something else you gotta think about is ownership management. That's an absolute game changer. So it goes back to the expectations, right? And I'm saying all this because I've gone through it. I'm going through it right now. And for those that are tuning in, you may be able to save yourself some time and definitely some money, and perhaps some sleepless nights, some headaches, some heartaches, and so forth, right? So, at the end of the day, like you got to figure out, based on the capital that you have to deploy and the strategy that you're going to implement or utilize, how you want to handle the operations, because it all ties in together. And I can go on about how the three work together, but essentially I want to take a sidestep here. Based on the capital that you have available to deploy, and then the terms of its usage, then can help you determine your strategy. Or maybe if you have a strategy that requires a certain type of capital, that helps tremendously. And then, based on those two things, that helps determine how you can operate. Because, and this is pretty advanced, but with the different types of funding and financing out there, most of which, or a lot of which, is short-term debt or hard money loans, that limits your strategy, and that can hinder how you can operate, okay? And especially if you're looking to grow a portfolio of, revenue generating, hopefully cash flow, positive net cash flow generating investments, then, okay, the use of long-term debt is huge. Okay, so that's a side note. Back to the operations, okay, because again, it all ties in together, all right? Willingness, capacity, expectations, huge, okay? Processes, systems, however you want to look at it. I look at it as movement and management, okay? Managing the property, okay? Managing the people, and managing the business itself, okay? There's a lot that goes into it. And my gosh, the disconnect, I could go on and on about that. I mentioned ownership management, okay? I'll leave y'all with this because I don't want this video to go too long because I could get carried away. That's something I would encourage y'all to look at, okay? Because you gotta understand, again, back to the capacity and the willingness before that, and then the expectations, okay? We have seen the absolute best success, and it's not just for properties that I own with my business partners. I've been able to help over 100 investors over the last 14 plus years, and I've seen a lot of different trends, okay? And I've seen a lot of different patterns, okay? And I've been able to dissect and see from the top investors who are able to get in and stay in and grow, do a certain number of things. And one of those big things is ownership management, okay? Because again, it's just human nature. And especially in the Kansas City market, that's where we live, that's where I live and operate, okay? We've been able to bring in, or a lot of investors are drawn to our market in the Midwest because, you can get properties at a lower cost, right? And then you can do more deals or whatever, and you could go on down the list. But most of my investors, clients, partners are out of state, the ones that I've had. Some of them in-state, but the ownership management is huge from those investors, the ones that I own and have performed the best. You gotta think about it. Like if someone is assisting you, and again, it's human nature, it is what it is, and they got all the stuff going on in their life with their family and their business and so forth, and psychologically, financially, if they're assisting you and getting paid a fee to assist you, okay, and they don't necessarily have ownership in that property, they're gonna maybe charge you more, okay, and they may not necessarily be on the ball as much. And so over time, and the thing with real estate investing, from the mortgages to the long-term investing, it's a long-term thing. And unfortunately, it can take months, if not years, for investors to see the reality of it. So there's a reason why we do seller financing. There's a reason I talk about capital strategy and operations and management and expectations, right? And there's a reason that I'm telling y'all about ownership management. So that's it for now. I'm probably gonna continue the series at some point in the future as I go through the various topics, and some outside of my main ones being capital strategy and operations. So if you wanna know more, if you're interested in placing capital, if you need funding and financing, okay, we are doing funding and financing, commercial debt for fix and flippers, for investors who need to refi, all right, and for multifamily and commercial investors. So reach out if you want to know more. Appreciate you tuning in. Peace.